Growing old in America is becoming a nightmare, and I want to tell you a number that I have not been able to get out of my head since I read it. Researchers at the University of California, San Francisco studied older adults who had become homeless, and they wanted to know how much warning people got before they lost their housing. The answer was 7 days. That is the median. 7 days. And for people who were not on the lease, who were staying with a family member or a friend, it was 1 day. 1 day of notice, at 68 years old. And here is the other thing they found. The median monthly household income for those folks in the 6 months before they lost their housing was $920. Now that used to be a story about a certain kind of person. It isn't anymore. In the early 1990s, people 50 and older made up about 10% of the homeless population in this country. Today, according to federal data, it's close to half. And in San Diego's 2026 count, 52% of the unsheltered older adults said it was their first time. Their first time in their 60s and 70s. I need to talk about this. Half the homeless in America are now over 50. And that used to be 10%. So let me lay out what's actually happened here. Because when I first started reading about this, I thought I must be misunderstanding the numbers. I wasn't. In the early 1990s, single adults aged 50 or older were about 11% of the homeless population. By 2003, it was 37%. And now, in the 2020s, we're at close to half of the single adults who are homeless in this country are 50 or over. And on a single night in 2023, which was the first year HUD actually started counting people over 55 separately, there were more than 138,000 people aged 55 and older who were homeless. More than 1 in 5 of everybody counted that night was over 55. Now I want to say something about that number and how it's collected, because I think it matters. That's the point-in-time count. It's done on one night in January, by volunteers, walking around with clipboards, and everybody who works in this field will tell you, it's an undercount. You know, it's the best we have, but people sleeping in cars in a Walmart parking lot get missed. People staying on a daughter's couch don't get counted at all. People sleeping in the woods behind the shopping center, which happens in my town, mostly get missed. So whatever the real number is, it's bigger. And here's what makes me the most upset. The Urban Institute looked at where this is heading, and their projection is that without a change in policy, the number of older adults experiencing homelessness will triple by 2030. Triple, that's 4 years from now. And by 2038, an additional 4 million older adults with low incomes will have no access to affordable housing at all. 4 million people. That's not a projection about a distant future. That's about people who are, right now, in their 50s. That's about your neighbors. And honestly, it might be about some of the people watching this video. The share of older adults in sheltered homelessness went up 37% between 2019 and 2022. Just in those 3 years. So when people ask me why I get worked up about this subject, that's why. Because this isn't a slow drift. This is something that's accelerating, and it's accelerating in a direction that ends with a lot of elderly people sleeping in their cars. And I don't think most Americans have any idea it's happening. I'll be honest with you. When I was younger, if I'm being truthful, I probably assumed that people who were homeless had made some choices. That's what a lot of us grew up hearing. And the older I get, and the more I learn, the more I understand that most of the time that's just not what happened. What happened is that the rent went up and the check didn't. Most of these people have never been homeless before in their entire lives. This is the part that I think would surprise most people, and it's the part that keeps me up at night. In San Diego's 2026 count, 52% of the unsheltered older adults surveyed said they were experiencing homelessness for the first time. And that was up 4 percentage points from the year before. More than half of them, first time. At 60, 65, 70 years old. Now think about what that means. These aren't people who've been on the street since they were 20. These are people who worked, who paid rent for 40 years, who raised kids, who showed up, who did honestly more or less what they were told to do. And then something happened. The research is pretty consistent about what that something usually is, and there are 3 main ones. A job loss. And I want to say something about this because when you're 62 and you lose a job, that is not the same as losing a job at 32. We talked about this in another video. The market closes around you, nobody says why, and the job loss frequently takes your health insurance with it, which sets up the second trigger, a medical crisis. You get sick, or your spouse gets sick. And even with insurance, the out-of-pocket piece is enormous, and there's no income coming in during it, and the savings go, and the loss of a spouse, either through death or through divorce. That third one is the one people underestimate, and I want to spend a minute on it because I think it's the most invisible. When one spouse dies, the household does not keep both Social Security checks, it keeps the larger one. So a couple that was managing on two checks, tightly but managing, becomes one person on one check. The rent doesn't go down. The utilities barely go down. The property taxes and the insurance don't go down at all. Overnight, the household income can drop by 30 or 40%, while the housing costs stay exactly where they were. And that happens at the exact moment when the surviving person is grieving and probably not thinking clearly, and possibly not the one who handled the money in that marriage. I've known women, and it's usually women because we outlive our husbands, who found out what the bills actually were for the first time in their lives at 74 years old, standing in a kitchen 3 weeks after the funeral. That's how it happens. Not through failure. Through one event landing on a situation that had no slack in it. And I want to say this as clearly as I can because I hear it in comments all the time and it breaks my heart. If this is happening to you, you did not fail. The math changed underneath you. There is a difference between a person who made bad decisions and a person whose good decisions stopped working. And almost everybody I read about in these studies is the second kind. And can I tell you what actually gets me about the first-time number? It means the shelters and the programs are full of people who have no idea how any of this works. Somebody who's been unhoused for years knows the system. They know which shelter takes people and when the beds fill and where to go for a meal and how to keep their documents safe and who to talk to. A 70-year-old woman who lost her apartment 3 weeks ago knows none of that. She's never needed to. She's frightened, she's embarrassed, she probably hasn't told her own children, and she is trying to navigate a bureaucracy that is genuinely difficult for anybody on no sleep at 70. That's the picture the 52% describes. Not what most people imagine when they hear the word homeless. And it's why the folks who work in this area say over and over that prevention is everything. Keeping somebody in the apartment they already have is not just cheaper, it's a completely different problem than getting somebody back into housing once they're out. Once you're out, you've lost your address, which means you may lose your mail, which means you may lose the benefit check that was the only thing holding you up. It cascades fast. That's why the 7 days matters so much. 7 days of warning, and 1 day if you're staying with family. I want to come back to that UCSF study because I don't think I've read anything about aging in America that disturbed me more. Researchers looked at older adults who had become unhoused, and one of the things they measured was how much notice people had before they lost their last housing. The median was 7 days. For people who held the lease, it was 14 days. For people who did not hold the lease, meaning they were staying with somebody, it was 1 day. 1 day. And I keep thinking about what that actually looks like, because we picture homelessness as a slow slide, don't we? Somebody gradually losing ground over months, and surely at some point they'd ask for help. Surely somebody would notice. 7 days is not a slide. 7 days is a phone call, and then a week. You cannot find new housing in 7 days at 68 years old on $900 a month. You cannot get on a waiting list for senior housing in 7 days, because those lists are frequently years long. You cannot apply for a subsidy in 7 days. You cannot sell things, or move things, or arrange things. What you can do in 7 days is put what fits in your car, and that's the other thing that's changed. More older people are living in vehicles now. The San Diego report specifically noted more seniors living in vehicles, and increasingly more women than men. I think about that a lot, honestly, because a car is not sheltered. It's cold in the winter, and it's dangerous in the summer, and you can't cook, and you can't shower, and you get moved along by the police, which, as I've mentioned, happens in my own town, and I've never known where those folks go afterward. Now let me tell you the practical thing, and this is why I wanted to include this section, rather than just tell you a sad number. If you are ever within sight of this, do not wait for the 7 days. The single most important thing I can tell anybody watching this is that the help that exists is almost entirely oriented toward prevention, and it dries up the moment you're actually out. It is dramatically easier to keep somebody housed than to rehouse them, and everybody who works in this field knows it, and the money follows that logic. Which means the moment you know there's trouble coming, months out, that's when to reach for it. Not when the notice comes. And here's who to call, and I want you to write this down. Dial 211. That's it. Just 211, from any phone in most of this country. It's a free information line that connects you to local assistance for housing, utilities, food, and emergency needs. Most people have never heard of it, and it is the single best starting point that exists. Find your area agency on aging. Every part of this country is covered by one. They exist specifically for people over 60, they're federally supported, and they know about programs that are not advertised anywhere. And if there's an eviction involved, look for a legal aid organization in your area. because in many places tenants have rights and deadlines that a person doesn't know about, and that a lawyer does, and legal aid is free. None of that requires money. All of it requires calling before the week runs out. And I want to add one thing about that study that I keep turning over, because it explains something I never understood. People always ask, why didn't they ask for help sooner? And I used to wonder that too. Well, now I think I know. If the median warning is 7 days, then a lot of these folks didn't have a long, slow decline where they could have reached out. They were housed, and then they were told, and then it was over. The whole thing happened inside a week. And think about who they were staying with. In the cases where the notice was 1 day, that's a family member, a daughter, a brother, a friend, which means something happened in that relationship, or that person's own situation changed, and suddenly the arrangement ended. I've seen that in my own extended family, honestly. Somebody moves in with an adult child because it makes sense financially. And then the marriage in that house gets strained, or the child loses a job, or there's a falling out over something that has nothing to do with money. And the arrangement that was supposed to be the safety net evaporates in an afternoon. That's why I'm careful about telling people that moving in with the kids is the answer. Sometimes it is, but it's not a plan, it's a hope. And it depends on other people's marriages and other people's employment staying stable, and you have no control over either of those things. If you're in that situation, or heading toward it, please have the conversation about what happens if, not because anybody's expecting the worst, because a conversation held in a calm kitchen is worth an enormous amount when the situation changes. The math doesn't work, and here is exactly why it doesn't. Okay, so let me show you the arithmetic, because I think when people see it side by side, it stops being a mystery. About 90% of Americans over 65 receive a Social Security benefit. And for a lot of folks, that is essentially the whole income, not a supplement to a pension and savings, the way it was designed. The whole thing. The average monthly Social Security benefit has been running somewhere around $1,800 to $2,000. Now put that next to rent. The median apartment in this country has been running right around $2,000 a month. And in the big metros, it's far worse than that. New York in the 4,000s. Boston in the high 3,000s. Los Angeles around 3,500. So the average Social Security check in a lot of this country does not cover the median rent. Not the rent plus groceries. The rent. And for people on supplemental security income, which is the program for very low-income folks, it's worse. In California, where the average SSI benefit is around $1,183 a month, Justice in Aging found there is not a single county in the state where somebody on that income can afford a studio apartment. Not one county in the whole state. Now, here's the statistic that I think explains the whole crisis in one line. 34% of older adult renters spent 50% or more of their income on rent. And that is higher than any other age group in America, higher than young families, higher than anybody. And the group most likely of all to be severely cost-burdened is renters 75 and older. 75 and older. Those are people who are almost certainly not going back to work, whose income is fixed for life, and who are handing over half or more of it to a landlord. When you're spending half your income on rent, you have no margin at all. A car repair is a crisis. A dental bill is a crisis. A rent increase of $150 is not an annoyance, it's an eviction on a delay, and that's why I keep saying it's not a personal failure. You can budget perfectly, clip every coupon, never eat out, do everything right, and if the rent takes 55%, the arithmetic still doesn't work. Now let me say the hard part about the cost of living adjustment, because people ask about this constantly. Yes, Social Security has a COLA, it goes up most years. But the adjustment is calculated using an index based on the spending patterns of urban wage earners, which is a working-age population. And working-age people spend their money differently than retirees do. Retirees spend a much bigger share on healthcare and housing, and those two things have been rising faster than the general basket for years. So the check goes up, and the specific things you buy go up faster, and you lose a little ground every single year, even though the number on the statement got bigger. Do that for 15 years, and you're a completely different distance from your rent than you were when you retired. It's hitting women harder, and I don't think that's an accident. I want to talk about this specifically because I've noticed it in the reporting, and because most of the people who write to me about being scared are women. The San Diego report noted that this population is increasingly composed of more women than men, and across the research, older women show up as a growing share. Now, why would that be? And there are several reasons, and none of them are mysterious. We live longer, so there are simply more of us at the ages where this happens, and more of us who end up alone. We earned less. Women of my generation earned less over a lifetime, both because of wage differences and because a great many of us took years out of the workforce to raise children or to care for a parent. And Social Security is calculated on your top 35 years of earnings. So if you have 10 years of zeros in there because you were home with babies, that's not a gap in your resume. That's a permanent reduction in your check for the rest of your life. Nobody explained that to us at the time. I certainly didn't understand it in my 30s. We're less likely to have a pension, and more likely to have worked in jobs that never offered a retirement plan at all. Waitressing, retail, home health, childcare, cleaning, all of that work is real work, and a great deal of it came with nothing attached. And we're the ones who did the caregiving, which means many women left the workforce early to care for a husband or a parent, at exactly the years when they'd have been earning the most and saving the most. So you get to 72, having worked your whole life in one way or another, with a smaller check than your husband had, and then he dies and you lose his check and keep yours, and the rent stays the same. I want to say something to the women watching this who are married and whose husband handles the money, please, and I say this with love, find out what the situation actually is. Not because anything's wrong, because the statistics say that you will probably outlive him, and the very worst time to learn how the household works is 3 weeks after a funeral. Know where the accounts are, know what the mortgage or the rent is, and when it's due. Know what the insurance covers, know the passwords. Know whether there's a will and where it is. Know who to call, and know one specific thing, because it's worth more money than almost anything else you'll ever decide. When one spouse dies, the survivor keeps the larger of the two Social Security benefits, not both. Which means the timing of when the higher earner claims is really about protecting whoever lives longer, and that's usually the wife. Claiming later means a bigger check for the rest of a widow's life. It's one conversation, and a lot of couples never have it, and the woman pays for it for 20 years. That's not gloomy. That's just knowing where the light switch is before the power goes out. People are hiding this, and you probably know somebody who is. Now I want to talk about the part that isn't in any study, because it's the part I actually see. People don't tell you. They're proud. And I get that. I really do, because I'm from a generation where you didn't air your business. You handled it. You didn't take charity. You certainly didn't tell your friends at church that you were 3 weeks from losing your apartment. So what happens is that somebody in your life is in genuine trouble and you have absolutely no idea because they've gotten very good at making it invisible. And there are signs, if you know what you're looking for. I've been thinking about this a lot and I want to share them, not so you can go snooping in people's business, but because being the person who notices is genuinely something you can do. They stop coming to things that cost money. Lunch out. The group that goes to the diner after church. And they always have a reason, and the reason is always plausible. They've started declining rides places, or driving less, and it turns out to be about gas money. Their house is colder than it used to be, or warmer in the summer. That one is a big signal, and people are very embarrassed about it. They're vague about the future. If you ask what they're doing next month, and the answer stays fuzzy every single time, sometimes that's because they genuinely don't know where they'll be. They've started selling things, not decluttering, which people talk about happily. Selling, and being a bit odd about it, they stop going to the doctor, or they mention stretching a prescription. That one is serious, and it's very common. And the biggest one, honestly, is that they get quieter. They pull back, because shame is isolating, and it makes people disappear from the very relationships that would have caught them. So what do? Because I know some of you are thinking, well, I can't just march over and ask about somebody's finances. You're right, you can't, and you shouldn't. But here's what works. Don't ask if they need help. They will say no. Every time, that question makes a person admit something, and they will not do it. Instead, offer something specific and small, and offer it as though it benefits you. I made too much soup. Can you take some? I'm going to the store. Ride with me and keep me company. I've got an extra ticket. I need help with something in the garage. That gives a proud person a way to accept without accepting, and it opens a door that they can walk through later, on their own timing when they're ready, and then just keep showing up. Regularly. Because the person who's there every Tuesday is the person who eventually gets told the truth, and the person who asks once and then disappears never does. I've been on the other side of that too, by the way. There were years in my life when things were tighter than I ever let on to anybody. And I remember exactly who kept inviting me to things, and I remember that not one of them ever made me say why I kept declining. That's what it looks like. It's not dramatic, it's just somebody refusing to stop calling. There is help out there, and most of it goes unclaimed, which makes me crazy. Alright, so let me get to the part that I actually think is the most useful thing in this whole video, because it makes me a little crazy how much assistance in this country goes unused simply because nobody knows about it. I'm going to go through these one at a time. Some of these you may know. I'd bet money there are 2 or 3 on here you don't. Start with 211. Free call. Most of the country connects you to local help with housing, utilities, food, and crisis needs. That's the front door. Your area agency on aging, federally supported, covers every county, exists specifically for people 60 and over. They know about local programs that are advertised nowhere. If you only do one thing from this list, find yours and put the number in your phone. LIHEP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, helps with heating and cooling bills. And here's the thing people don't know. It typically has a crisis component separate from the regular assistance, and you can sometimes get both. Apply early in the season, because it's usually first come and the money runs out. The Weatherization Assistance Program, which is different from LIHEP and which almost nobody knows about. It pays for insulation, air sealing, and sometimes furnace repair or replacement, at no cost for qualifying households. That one permanently lowers your bills instead of paying them once. Ask your local community action agency. Snap, and I know some of you just bristled at that, so let me say this plainly. A great many seniors who qualify never apply because they don't think they're the kind of person who does. But there are deductions specific to older households, including out-of-pocket medical costs above a threshold, and an uncapped shelter deduction for households with an elderly or disabled member. Which means people who assume they earn too much frequently qualify anyway. You paid into this system your entire working life. Use it. Medicare savings programs. This is the one I most want you to look up. There are state programs that pay your Medicare Part B premium for you, and some pay deductibles and coinsurance too. That premium comes straight out of your Social Security check every month, so having it paid is the same as a raise. Enormous numbers of eligible people have never heard of it. Call your state health insurance assistance program, which is free counseling, and ask extra help, also called the low-income subsidy, for prescription drug costs. Same story, underused, property tax relief. Nearly every state has something for seniors: a homestead exemption, a senior freeze, a circuit breaker, a deferral. The names vary, and almost all of them require you to apply, and a shocking number of eligible homeowners never do. If you own your home, call your county assessor's office and ask directly what's available for people your age. That call has saved people thousands of dollars a year. Section 202 Housing, which is federally supported housing built specifically for low-income seniors. The waiting lists are long, sometimes years, which is exactly why you get on the list before you need it, not after. Get on it now, even if you're fine. You can always turn a unit down. Housing choice vouchers, the program people still call Section 8. Also long lists. Also apply early. And your utility company, ask about budget billing to smooth the payments, ask about low-income rates, and ask about arrearage forgiveness, which is a program where they forgive part of a past due balance for every on-time payment you make. They will not offer it. You have to ask by name. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking, because I've thought it myself. That's charity, and I don't take charity. Can I say something about that? You paid for these. Every paycheck of your working life had money taken out of it for exactly this purpose. This isn't a handout, it's the thing you were paying for. And the people who most need these programs are, over and over, the exact people who are too proud to claim them. There is nothing noble about being cold in your own house to protect your pride. I promise you that the people who love you would much rather you took the help. Some of this you can get ahead of, even now, even late. I don't want to leave you with only sad numbers, so let me talk about the things that actually change the outcome, including for people who feel like it's too late. The first one, and I think the most important, is to understand that housing is the whole game. Everything in this crisis runs through housing. Not groceries, not gas, housing. Which means the single most protective decision you can make is to get your housing costs down to something a fixed income can carry, and to do it while you still have choices rather than after you've run out of them. That might mean downsizing earlier than you planned. It might mean moving somewhere cheaper while you're still able to manage a move, because moving at 78 is a completely different proposition than moving at 66. It might mean moving nearer to family before a crisis, instead of during one. Nobody wants to hear that, and I understand that house has your whole life in it. But I'd rather you chose the move than had it chosen for you. The second one is to know the number. Sit down and work out what your absolute floor is. Not your budget, your floor. Housing, utilities, food, insurance, medications, transportation. The things that must be paid. And then compare it honestly to your fixed income. If those two numbers are close together, that is the most important fact about your life right now. And it's worth acting on this year rather than in 3 years. The third is to look seriously at housemates, and I want to talk about this because the stigma is enormous and it's fading fast. Harvard's housing researchers have noted that more seniors are living with roommates now, sometimes with people they didn't previously know, simply to afford the rent. There are home-sharing programs in a lot of communities that match older homeowners who have a spare room with people who need housing, with screening and an agreement. And I know how that lands for our generation. It feels like a step backward. It feels like college. But splitting a rent in half is the single largest change most renters can make to their monthly outflow. And it also happens to solve the isolation problem at the same time, which is not a small thing. There's somebody there if you fall. Somebody notices if you don't come out of your room. The fourth is the paperwork. And this is boring, and it matters. Have your documents in order and tell somebody where they are. Healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, advance directive, will. If a crisis comes and those don't exist, everything gets harder and more expensive at the worst possible moment. And the fifth is the one that isn't financial at all, and I think it might be the most protective of all of them. Stay connected to people. Look at how these stories go. Somebody gets 7 days' notice, and what determines what happens next is almost entirely whether there's somebody to call, a spare room, a couch, a person who'll co-sign something, a friend who knows about a place, a church that has a fund nobody advertises. The people who end up in a car are very often the people who ran out of relationships before they ran out of money. So all that stuff about staying in the group, going to the thing, keeping up with people even when you're tired and it's easier not to, that isn't just about happiness. That's your actual safety net in a country where the official one has holes in it. And it works both directions, which is the beautiful part. Be the person other people can call, and you become the person who has people to call. Owning your home doesn't protect you the way we all assumed it would. I want to talk about something that I think a lot of us got wrong, and I include myself in that. We were raised to believe that if you paid off the house, you were safe. That was the finish line. Get the mortgage burned and nobody can ever put you out. And that's not quite true anymore, and I don't think enough people my age have really sat with it, because a paid-off house still costs money. Every single month. Property taxes, which in a lot of places have gone up substantially because home values went up and your assessment went up with them even though you have no intention of selling, and got no benefit from it whatsoever. Homeowners insurance, which in some states has become genuinely frightening. I know people whose premium has gone up 40 or 50% in a couple of years because of losses in other parts of the country that they had nothing to do with. Utilities, maintenance, and that last one is the sneaky one, because a house is a machine that is always slowly falling apart, and when you're 70, the roof and the furnace and the water heater are all reaching the end of their lives at roughly the same time, and each one is thousands of dollars. So you can be house rich and cash poor. You can be sitting in an asset worth $300,000 and not have $400 for a plumber. And here's how that turns into a crisis. And this is the part I really want people to know about. The tax bill doesn't get paid. Then it doesn't get paid the next year either. And in most states, unpaid property taxes eventually lead to a tax lien, and then in some places to a tax sale, where a house that somebody owns free and clear gets taken over a few $1,000s. People lose paid-off houses over property taxes. It happens, and it happens quietly, and it happens to older people more than anybody. So here is what I would want every homeowner over 60 watching this to do, and it is one phone call. Call your county assessor's office and ask what property tax relief exists for people your age. Ask specifically about a homestead exemption, a senior exemption, a senior freeze, a circuit breaker, and a deferral. Those are the words. The names vary by state, and almost every state has something. A deferral in particular is worth understanding. In some states, you can defer property taxes entirely until the house is sold or you pass away, with the amount becoming a lien against the property. Some people don't like that idea because it reduces what the children inherit, and I understand that, but I would rather my kids inherit less than have me lose the house at 81, and I suspect your children would tell you exactly the same thing if you asked them. The other thing to look at is whether your homeowner's insurance is still right for you. A lot of people are carrying coverage and deductibles they picked 20 years ago in a completely different financial situation. That's worth an hour with an agent. And please, if you're on a fixed income and something major breaks, look up whether your area has a home repair assistance program for seniors. Many counties have them, many are run through community action agencies or Habitat for Humanity affiliates, and almost nobody knows they exist. A free roof repair at 73 is the difference between staying and not. Every town is building apartments now and nobody likes it, including me. Let me talk about something happening in my own town, because I think it's happening in yours too, and I have complicated feelings about it. We've got at least 4 areas right now where they're putting up 3- and 4-story apartment buildings. Big ones. And they call it affordable housing. Nobody here likes it. And I'll be honest, My first reaction wasn't warm either. They change how a town looks. They bring traffic. The people who've lived here 40 years look at them and feel like something's being taken. And then I looked at what they're actually renting for, and they're not cheap. I'd guess at least $1,600 a month, maybe $13 if we're lucky. And I thought, well, that's not affordable for the people I'm worried about. Somebody on $1,800 of Social Security can't take a $1,600 apartment. So for a while I was just against it, the way most of my neighbors are, but I've thought about it more, and I want to share where I've landed, because I think this is one of those places where our generation may be part of the problem without meaning to be. Here's the thing, all those people have to live somewhere, and when a town doesn't build anything, the housing that already exists just gets more expensive, because more people are bidding for the same number of units. The little rental houses that used to be where a widow could afford to live get bought and fixed up and rented for double. That's what happened in my town. It's a tourist area, it's not cheap, and the modest housing that used to exist quietly got absorbed. So when people show up at a meeting and say no to a new building, and I've watched it, what actually happens is that nothing gets built and the rent on everything that already exists keeps climbing, which lands hardest on exactly the seniors we're all worried about. I'm not saying every project is good. Some of them genuinely are too big for the site, or the traffic really is a problem, or they call it affordable when it plainly isn't. But I've stopped assuming that opposing new housing is automatically the pro-neighbor position, because I don't think the arithmetic supports that. And there's a specific thing worth asking about at those meetings that almost nobody asks, and I'd love it if some of you would. Ask whether any of the units are actually income restricted, and for whom, and for how long. Because affordable is a marketing word when a developer uses it, and a legal term when a program uses it. Ask whether any units are set aside for seniors. Ask whether the project is using any program that requires a share of units to stay below market for a set number of years. And ask whether the town has any Section 202 senior housing, which is the federal program specifically for low-income older people, and whether there's a waiting list and how long it is. In a lot of places, that answer is years, which tells you everything about the size of the problem. Those questions change what gets built, and they get asked far more seriously when the person asking them is 71 and lived in that town for 4 decades, than when it's a planner from out of state. We have more standing at those meetings than almost anybody. I'd just like us to use it for the people coming behind us, and not only for the view. Why I don't think any of this is your fault. I want to finish by saying something that I feel strongly about, and then I want to hear from you. If any of this is your situation, or close to it, I do not want you sitting there thinking you failed. Look at what actually changed. Your parents' generation. A lot of them had a pension, an actual check that came every month for life, and the company was responsible for making sure it was there. That arrangement largely doesn't exist anymore for people in the private sector. It was replaced with a 401k, where all the risk got handed to the individual, and where you have to guess how long you'll live and manage market crashes in your 70s. And a great many people, including me, worked for companies that never offered anything at all. I had one job with a 401k. That was it. I had a small pension, and I saved what I could, and that's what a lot of us did, and we were told that was the plan. Then housing went up in a way that nobody our age could have predicted when we were making decisions in our 40s. And healthcare costs went up faster than the check did. And insurance. And property taxes. And every single one of those is a thing that happened to you, not a thing you chose. You cannot budget your way out of a rent that costs more than your income. There is no coupon for that. There's no giving up coffee that fixes it. And I get very frustrated when people talk about this like it's a personal responsibility issue, because the same people saying that would not have survived these numbers either. Now, I do want to say one honest thing, because I try to keep it real here. I'm all right. I have a home, it's affordable, and I probably bought at the right time, which was luck as much as anything. I don't know what it feels like to be one rent increase from nothing, and I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I read your comments, and there are people in this community sleeping in cars, and people staying with a grown child in a situation that isn't working, and people who are terrified and haven't told a single soul, and every one of them worked their whole life. That's not a story about individual choices. That's a story about a country that changed the deal partway through and never told the people who were counting on it. So here's what I'd ask you to do. If you're doing all right, look around at who might not be, and be the one who keeps inviting them. Say the thing about the extra soup. Keep calling. If you're struggling, please call 211 or your area agency on aging this week before it's an emergency, and please look up the Medicare savings programs and your county's senior property tax relief, because those two alone put real money back in people's pockets every month. And whatever your situation, tell somebody the truth about it. Just one person. Because the shame is doing at least as much damage as the money is, and shame is the thing that makes people disappear right when they most need to be seen. If this hit home for you, drop a comment below, tell me what you're seeing where you live or what you're going through. I read every one of them, and honestly the comments on these videos have taught me more than any study. We keep it real here for all of us. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye for now.